Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Eczema Podcast. Today I have a very special guest here, and she is a traditional Chinese medicine dermatologist, also known as a TCM practitioner, but not just any TCM practitioner. TCM dermatologists are actually pretty rare. If you head to tcmdermatology.org, you'll find that there are only 129 of them around the world. And that directory will actually let you know what TCM dermatologists are actually in your area. And it says that in United States, there are 50 of them. And in Canada, there are only 8 of them. In the United Kingdom, there are 23 of them. So I am so honored to have my guest on the show today. She has a lot of experience and a wealth of experience. And the thing I love about it is she works really closely with Dr. Peter Leo, who I've had on the show on season 1 and 2. He's a dermatologist and also on the board of the National Eczema Association. And I love that they have a working relationship where they refer patients to each other. I've never actually seen or heard of a dermatologist who has referred patients to a TCM practitioner before. And I think that is really, really amazing. So I had such a great talk with my guest today. And I also want to point out that TCM dermatology is a very, very specialized practice. First, they need to study TCM, and then they need to go into herbalism, and then they study more into a specialized stream of TCM dermatology. So it takes years and years of studying, and yeah, it's their specialty, and I am just so honored to have my guest on the show. One thing that we did touch upon is even, the type of herbs that a lot of TCM practitioners actually prescribe. And I love that my guest today, she prescribes herbs from a very, very high quality place with third-party testing and lab testing. And I think that is so important because I just want to point out that there have been numerous studies where they have actually found contaminants in the herbs used in traditional Chinese medicine. For example, in 2015, there was actually a study done by the University of Adelaide where they purchased 26 TCMs from random markets and they tested the contaminants in them. And 9 out of 10 of these medicines had some form of undeclared substance in them as either adulterated or contaminated. And 16 of them had more than one contamination. And that is actually not really a good sign because, we can be taking things and not really being sure of what's in it because there can be other things. So for example, among them, they found things like antihistamines, anti-inflammatories, and even antibiotics and stimulants. And significant levels of toxic heavy metals were found, such as arsenic, cadmium, and lead in over half of the medicines. In at least 4 of them, if you followed the directions on the label, it would expose you to over 10 times the regulatory limit for heavy metals in medicines. So you can see why it is so important to actually find herbs from a place that does third-party testing. And we talk a lot more in this episode about it. But recently, I also had a talk with another TCM dermatologist, and I remember asking him, do you see a difference when your patients use lab-tested and third-party tested herbs to test for heavy metals and to make sure there's no contaminants in it? And he said, yes, he finds that his patients, when they take herbs that are not lab tested, they do tend to react more because sometimes they may contain sulfates in it as well. And also lab tested herbs tend to be more effective as well, not because they are lab tested, but because they are higher quality. So I just wanted to share that with you. And that was a TCM dermatologist that I found in my area. And yeah, there are not that many around the world. So I just feel so honored to be able to share this episode with you today. Before we dive into it, I also just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by my Conqueror Dry Skin Balm and my bath treatment, both of which helped my skin so much when I went through my flare-ups. And I created it with high quality ingredients and all natural and with no harsh preservatives. And, the Conqueror Balm has actually shipped to over 20 countries around the world. So it's something that I am so proud of because it's been able to help people moisturize their skin and also help with the dryness. So if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, you can visit my site at Eczema Conquerors. That's Eczema Conquerors with an S, eczemaconquerors.com, and then head to the shop section on my menu. And I also want to let you know that if you want to follow me for more updates or even follow me on my skin recovery journey after giving birth, I post a lot on my Instagram and on my Facebook with tips and advice. And also, I just update you on my journey, and you can see a lot of my before and after photos there. I'm at Eczema Conquerors with an S on Instagram, Facebook, and I also have a free Facebook community support group for you to join. Just look for Eczema Conquerors support group and you'll be able to find it. And also, if you have taken the time to listen, I just want to thank you so much for listening. I know that we have a lot of people from around the world who listen to this podcast, and it would be so great if you could take the time to write an iTunes review and just let me know if you liked listening to it or even if you learned something new, because it will help other people find this podcast and learn new things that maybe they didn't know before, so that it can empower them to help them on their skin healing journey. I also just want to make a quick note that the audio in this podcast was not the clearest because one of my main audio files was actually damaged, so I had to use a backup one. So I hope that you'll still be able to hear the recording clearly and take the time to listen to it, because my guest really has a lot of information to share that is so helpful. So without further ado, I just want to start today's podcast, and thank you for listening.
Hi, and welcome to the Eczema Podcast, where you'll learn tips, products, and natural eczema remedies from Abby, registered holistic nutritionist and founder of eczemaconquerors.com. Stay tuned as she invites experts in the field. Here's your host of the Eczema Podcast, Abby.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Eczema Podcast. I have someone who I actually met last month at the Eczema Expo, and it was really great just learning so much about her. So her name is Olivia Sue Friedman. She's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and an herbalist. And I think that's a really amazing combination. She runs a clinic called the Amethyst Holistic Skin Solutions. She's based in Chicago, but she actually practices worldwide. And I'm really excited to introduce you to her and for her to share more about her story and how she got into it as well. So welcome, Olivia.
Hi, Abby. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
You are very, very welcome. So since we last spoke, I've actually met a couple of your clients who actually told me on Instagram after I posted some things about traditional Chinese medicine. They actually messaged me and told me that they actually see you. So I found that that was such a small world and just found that that was really, really neat. And yeah, it's great. You're helping a lot of people with eczema and topical steroid withdrawal as well. Is that right?
That's right. I think because Facebook and all the different social media outlets there are now, I mean, everybody seems to know each other, and when they find something that works for them, they talk to each other, and then before you know it, people start trying different things. So I think a lot of people have found me through that, and that's probably why you're meeting and bumping into people that know me.
Yeah, it's really great. And I know you treat some people on the Insan board as well, who I met at the conference. And I just wanted to know, how did you get into all of this?
It's actually a pretty interesting story from the standpoint of somebody who has eczema, because I had eczema, and I had it all my younger life, and it was really pretty bad, to be honest. I had it when I was born, and it just got worse and worse as I got older and older. And I think at my worst point, I was on 7 different medications all at once, because not only did I have eczema, but I also had asthma and I had allergies. And then that compounded to having anaphylaxis from time to time. So it was really bad. And I got to a point where it was really hard to manage, all the different medications, all the flare-ups and whatnot. And I'd been to the hospital a number of times, and it was just a really awful way to live. So I actually finally got to the point where I was really desperate for help because it was just really too much to manage. And I opened myself up to a Chinese herbalist. It was the first time in my life that somebody had given me hope, because when I told him what was going on with me and he looked at my skin, he was like, yeah, I think we can take care of that. And I was like, wait, what? Because all the other practitioners I had gone to prior to that pretty much said they could manage my symptoms, but never told me that they could actually make it go away. So I saw this practitioner for maybe 4 to 6 months, and I saw results fairly soon. At first it was very subtle, but, as time went on, it became a lot more remarkable. And at the end of working with him, my eczema went away. Most of my allergies went away. I still have a peanut allergy. My environmental allergies went away and my asthma went away. So I no longer had to take any drugs, and was amazed at how profoundly that changed my life. And I realized that if this guy could do this for me, how great would that be to be able to do it for somebody else? So that really inspired me to go back to school and become an herbalist and to be able to do this kind of medicine so that I could help other people who have had that same struggle that I have.
That's so amazing. And it looks like you're helping a lot of great people. So I'm interested in knowing how you actually treat them. So when someone has eczema or topical steroid withdrawal, how do you go about treating them in a way that helps them get better?
So Chinese medicine works a little differently than conventional medicine. I think what happens a lot of times with conventional medicine is we sort of look at a certain symptom and we try to shut it down. So a lot of steroids and immunosuppressants and biologics, a lot of them are kind of looking at one particular mechanism and trying to shut that thing down so it's not responding. What Chinese medicine does and a lot of holistic medicine does is look at the body as one big system that's made of a lot of different systems. And it sort of looks a little bit more at what's causing all of these things to happen. Instead of looking at a specific symptom, what is that root thing that's causing all of these symptoms? And the other thing we kind of look at differently is that even though we say you have eczema, in Chinese medicine, we actually break it down into a lot of different patterns of eczema. I think lots of times in Western medicine, we kind of say, well, you have eczema, therefore, we have this group of drugs that we use, and it's, typically steroids, immunosuppressants, biologics, maybe some moisturizers or whatnot, maybe some antibacterials, depending on what's going on with you. But everybody uses the same arsenal of drugs. Whereas in Chinese medicine, we kind of look at you and say, all right, what are all the contributing factors in your particular eczema? And, how are all the external things happening that are actually compounding that too? What's happening in your environment? What's happening with your diet? What's happening with your emotional, psychological makeup? What's happening with your basic constitution, and how is that sort of playing into your eczema? And there's a lot of different factors, not just, the physical mechanism inside. So we kind of look at in eczema 7 different patterns, and we sort of look at each patient to see which one they actually fall into. And then once we sort of figure out that pattern, then we also look at all those other contributing factors to sort of see, well, what other herbs can we use to kind of address your unique presentation. So I would say the biggest difference between Western and Eastern medicine is that Eastern medicine is much more customized, and it's much more based on how everything's working out for you. And so as a result, we're always changing the formula, because as your skin sort of heals or it needs different things along the treatment schedule, we're sort of changing out the ingredients as well to sort of meet those needs. Whereas I feel like in Western medicine, it's sort of you're sticking with the same medication, you're using the same amount. Maybe you're changing the dose a little bit, but you're not really changing the actual formulation of what you're getting. So I would say those are the biggest differences. Because people are so different in how they actually express their eczema. I mean, I've got people who it's only on the upper body. I have some people who it's only in the lower body. I've got some people who are extremely dry in a lot of identification. I've got other people who are oozing and weeping. And so each of those different presentations actually require completely different herbal medicines and completely different ingredients. And so those are the kinds of things that we think about. We also think about, where exactly is your eczema coming up? Because the location is really important. We have herbs that actually go to specific parts of your body, or they actually help to shuttle all of the ingredients to that specific part of the body. So if you say to me, Lydia, I've got, eczema on my hands, like I'm going to use some ingredients that are going to be very different from the people who say to me, well, my eczema is all on my face and my neck, or my eczema is all like behind my knees or behind my elbows. So it's very different that way.
That is super, super interesting. I just, I find that so interesting because in Western medicine, you only give one medicine, but that goes everywhere in the body. So it's not customized at all. So I want to... Oh, sorry, go on.
It's the same medicine that everybody gets, right? Because, you all have eczema, so you all get the same thing.
Yeah. And I want to know, do you notice a common pattern in people that you treat who have eczema or topical steroid withdrawal?
No, actually, that's where we really differ in that we really see a lot of different patterns for eczema. Like I mentioned, there's 7 different patterns that we work with as a starting point to figure out, what people need in terms of ingredients. And then it gets even more finite in all the other additional ingredients that we add. So we start with the 7. With TSW, I would say it's similar. I don't know if it's exactly 7. I would probably say there's at least 3 or 4 different patterns that I look at with TSW. And, I start with that and then I change the ingredients depending on other things that happen. I've got some people who have really, really rough nights where, they get super hot and they're itching so much more. And the people who are having those kinds of symptoms, I'm going to give them different ingredients than people who aren't having that. People who, are super, super itchy versus, people who are kind of itchy, not too much itchy, there's completely different herbs for those too. So it really depends on, the severity of each of the different symptoms, the severity of between night and day, and how much of that pattern is really coming through. When someone is weeping and oozy, is it just a little bit? Or are they pouring stuff out of their neck all day long, and that's a really different presentation. So I would say you start with a bunch of patterns, but then you decide where in the continuum are they in this pattern. Does that make sense?
Yep. And then do you notice in the patients that you work with that certain organs are weak, like that type of pattern?
Yeah. So Chinese medicine kind of looked at the body as a lot of different systems, very similarly to Western medicine. But we kind of name all of these different systems a little differently than they do in Western medicine. And while we will say things like, your liver meridian is strong or weak or whatnot, we're not necessarily saying your liver is not working. What we're kind of talking more about is how does that particular system affect what's going on in your body? In Chinese medicine, for example, the liver is very responsible for, your ability to get things done. And if you have less of that ability to do that, we say the liver meridian is not quite as strong. The liver is also responsible for the blood. I think in the Western translation, we say that too, right? It's supposed to clean the blood and whatnot. But it's slightly different understanding from the Chinese viewpoint. And a lot of it is because the whole Chinese methodology or Chinese medical system was based on not even seeing the inside of the body. Because if you think about it, Chinese medicine came about 2,000-3,000 years ago, and we didn't have microscopes back then. We didn't have cadaver labs back then. And so we weren't able to open up the body and look and see all these different mechanisms. So all of the ways that the Chinese people look at the body and how it works is based on observations from things that they actually could see. And that was nature. So they looked out into the environment and they sort of likened, what's happening in this macro system of the world and how do we relate that to the body? And it's really kind of interesting that their observations were so good because, a lot of everything that they looked at and kind of likened it to holds up now. And what's interesting is I think Western medicine is actually starting to look at a more holistic view of, how do we actually interact with the environment and how does that actually affect us? And, the whole idea of the microbiome is something that was always, part of Chinese medicine. And only recently we're starting to go, hey, I think this has a big part of, how people are healthy or not healthy or whatnot. So it's very interesting.
I just did a really, really fascinating podcast for my last episode on probiotics and the gut microbiome. So how do your herbs target the gut microbiome, or do they even target the gut microbiome?
I would definitely say that every single herbal formula affects all different parts of your body. I don't think there's any way that you can say that it avoids any part of your body. I will say that every system is probably affected whenever you have a skin condition. It's a matter of to what degree. And I will say that, a lot of people who have eczema for a while oftentimes find that it's really difficult for them to eat certain foods. Not necessarily because they're allergic to it, but because they develop a sensitivity all of a sudden, and it makes it really difficult for them to eat, or it actually makes them actually have their skin break out more, right? So in Chinese medicine, we definitely say that anything that happens to the skin is definitely going to impact, the other systems in the body. And if you think about it, it makes sense. The skin is like the largest system in your body, right? It's the largest organ of your body. How can it not affect everything else, right? And if the skin is basically the barrier between the outside world and the inside world, that's the only thing that's standing between you. If it's compromised, of course, it's going to affect everything else that goes on with you, right? And, the skin is also what divides you between, your oral mucosa and your throat, your stomach and all that. That's also skin that's like being exposed to the outside world as well, right? And that's also the way that we take in food, we take in air and whatnot. So it's funny when people say that, they're totally unrelated. They can't have anything to do with each other. And you're like, not sure about that. I think it definitely does,
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm interested in knowing, how long does it usually take for a treatment to work? I know that everyone will be slightly different, but I'm just wondering if there's like an estimated range that you notice for how long it takes.
Yeah, it's really hard to say for sure because it really depends on to what degree your eczema has affected you. People who are pretty healthy, but just have a more superficial expression of eczema probably will take a lot less time. But people who have had it for a lot longer and it's affecting all their other systems and whatnot, it'll probably take longer. And if you think about it, it's because you're not just trying to get rid of what's happening on your skin. You're trying to change your body so that it actually repairs all of the systems that are now become damaged or impaired as a result of your skin barrier being compromised, right? So in order to do all that work, you have to do all that work on the inside out. And I think a lot of people get frustrated because they're like, well, I'm just dealing with this stuff that's on my skin. So why can't it just go away? I'm like, well, it's kind of happening because there's all these other things going on underneath the skin, right? And I liken it to exercise. A lot of people are like, hey, I want a six-pack of abs, right? But you can't just go to the gym once and do 3 sit-ups and go, all right, done. I'm all better. I can have my six-pack of abs now. You kind of have to work at it, right? And you have to consistently do things that are sort of rebuilding your system to, bring more blood into the system, bring more nutrients into the system so you can build muscles so that you can actually become stronger. And it's very much the same thing when you're actually trying to repair your skin. You're trying to repair a lot of different systems underneath it and make it healthier so it can actually go back to the way it's meant to work.
And I find that so funny because, even in my practice, I find so many people want to heal so quickly and they just expect a fast healing. But then, we have to heal from the inside out and it can take a long time sometimes, months. And some people even get worse before they get better. So I guess with your herbs, you notice the same thing where people get worse before they get better?
I don't know if that's necessarily a path that you have to go through. I will say that oftentimes what happens is that when you start taking herbs, you're not going to eliminate the flares immediately. What's going to happen is that the flares will probably become less intense over time, and they will probably become less frequent. And I think when people start taking the herbs at first and then they have a flare, they're like, oh my God, this just caused a flare. And it's like, no, you actually have been having flares. The thing is, like, we just want to get you to the point where you can repair a little bit more so that the flares are not happening as much and they're not, affecting you as intensely. So I don't think that people necessarily get worse. I think what happens is they actually are going through the flare that they would have gone through. And then as we're continuing to treat, they just don't have as many of those things happen.
And then do you find that people with topical steroid withdrawal tend to take longer to heal compared to people who are just going through regular eczema?
I would say it's all different too. I mean, it really depends on how much of your body has been affected. I mean, I definitely have some people who have TSW and it's like really localized, it's just one area. And I've had people who their entire body has been affected. And I think people are also at different points in their healing when they come to me. Like some people have had it for many, many years and they've actually started to get better. And then it's like easier to move them to the next place. And it's other people who just started having TSW and the reaction is, really strong. So it really depends. I don't know that I can say for sure that there's a timeline. It really depends on how much it has compromised your own body.
That's actually a really good point because you're right. Like everyone will come see you at different points and everyone's at different stages of their healing. So yeah, that's also one thing that I do want to remind the listeners is never to compare your journey with other people as well, because some people might be further along than other people. So you'll all be at different stages and everyone heals at different points. Just like Olivia mentioned, everyone can take a different amount of time depending on your severity as well. You mentioned something really interesting to me last time when I saw you was that you work really closely with Dr. Peter Leo, who's the other dermatologist. He's also on the National Eczema Association Scientific Advisory Board. And you mentioned to me that he'll actually refer patients to you and then you'll refer patients to him too. So that's the first time I've heard of a dermatologist referring patients out to a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. So yeah, I just wanted to hear more about that too, because I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, I give Dr. Leo a lot of credit because he's really open to really doing the best things for all of his patients. And, I think that's just a really great way to approach things. And I think, all doctors should really be thinking about what is the best thing for their patients and who, if I'm not the right person, who is the right person I can send them to, right? So I really like the way he thinks about things. I think that there's a place for Western and Eastern medicine. I never want to come across like I have anything against anything of Western medicine. I think that there's a lot of cases where I've seen Dr. Leo do amazing things with people. And, all of the medicines that I mentioned before, like, steroids and immunosuppressants and biologics and whatnot, I mean, they've helped a lot of people, so I'm never going to say that's not the option to go with. I would say that there are some people that this is really the right option for them. And then there's some people that probably Eastern medicine is a better option for them. So it really depends on who you are and, what your requirements are. Some people, want a natural option, in which case, Eastern medicine is probably a good way to go. I think there's also people who respond better to some medicines versus others. I think every single kind of medicine, there's always somebody who just does not respond well to it. And I think that's fair to say that herbal medicine is also, something that there's a few people who just do not respond to it well, or they have a bad reaction to it, and in those cases, like I send them to Dr. Leo because there's nothing else I can do for them, and maybe there's a medicine that he has that will help them. But, there's times when people try different medicines and then they have reactions or side effects or whatnot. And in which case there is no Western solution for it. And in the case of TSW, I mean, Eastern medicine is definitely a great way to go because at that point in time, you probably are a little gun shy to use any other pharmaceuticals, and here is a natural answer for you. So I think it really depends. I also think it depends on where you are financially. I think, Eastern medicine, typically people can't get insurance coverage for. Herbal medicine is not recognized by most insurance companies at this point. flexible spending accounts and health spending accounts oftentimes can be used, but the insurance companies themselves will not just let us bill that directly. So if people can afford that, then it's a great option. But if they can't and they have to rely on their insurance companies to pay for their health care, then it's a better option for them to go to someone like Dr. Leo, So I think you really have to look at your own situation and see what makes the most sense for you. And depending on what your response is, the different medicines, whether they're East or West, really will determine the direction that makes sense for you.
Yeah, that's so true. And yeah, I think that's really neat that you have that working relationship with Dr. Peter Leo. And for those of you who haven't heard my other podcasts, I've done 2 podcast interviews with Dr. Peter Leo, which you can check out on season 1 and season 2 of my podcast. The other thing I'm going to get a ton of questions about, and you might as well, but I think a lot of people are going to ask, what's the expected budget that they should be spending on, which they should expect to spend on Chinese medicine?
Well, every practitioner is different, so I can just tell you about what I usually charge. Usually people come to me for an initial intake, and that's usually $225. That's usually for 60 minutes. And the reason why it's so long is because we have to really talk about, your entire health history and your whole skin history and every single component that has played a part in this so that we can really understand, what herbs to give you. From there, I usually see people every couple of weeks. And the reason is because, as you heal, you're going to need completely different ingredients. And I really need to understand where you're at, what's happening, what's coming up for you. So those appointments are basically $100 each. They're usually for 30 minutes. And then from there, usually the herbs come in a liquid form. They are drop shipped to your house from the pharmacy that I work with, which is Camo Pharmacy, located in New York City. And usually take 2 dosages a day. They're packets that are the size of a smaller cell phone, not the gigantic ones that are out there now. Usually they run somewhere between $70 and $100 a week, depending on what ingredients we use. And sometimes I use some topicals, and the topicals are a great way to handle, getting rid of that itch cycle or just having a way to treat the external as well as the internal, so that we can come at the skin at both directions and, usually treat it a lot faster. And those usually run somewhere between $20 and $40 each, but they usually last for depending on how often you use it and how many parts of your body you're using it on, it can be up to a month or so, maybe even more, depending on, how much you use. So that's the basic gist of what it's like to work with an herbalist. I think the basic idea is to get you to a point where you don't need any herb at all. And so that's the goal. So I look at it as an investment in your health, because you're sort of trying to rebuild your body to the point where it's healthy enough to, work on its own without having to do something. I know there's things like Dupixent and whatnot, which is an ongoing cost. It's something that your insurance company will have to pay for forever until you're not using it anymore. And a lot of the things that I think people are using right now, the idea is to kind of manage more than it is to actually resolve the situation. So I look at it as an investment in your health, and to get to the point like myself, where I'm not using anything. I don't use anything to maintain, my healthy skin now. And I pretty much live, drug and herbal free.
That's great. Yeah, that's really great. I have had someone who mentioned to me that they were seeing another Chinese medicine practitioner and they gave them licorice root and they're going through topical steroid withdrawal. So I know that can sometimes mimic steroids, and some people have had a flare after using that. And they mentioned to me that when they saw you didn't give it to them, so they were really happy about that. So that's just something I wanted to point out.
Yeah. I actually did a little research paper on licorice root because it kept on coming up with a lot of the TSW patients that I saw. And I really wanted to understand, what exactly was the chemical constituent of licorice that was causing this, or is it really an issue? And what I found through my research is that, yes, in fact, it mimics a steroid, but there are many different kinds of steroids in your body. And the one that, everyone is really concerned about that affects the HPA axis is a glucocorticoid. And what licorice is not that. It's actually a mineral corticoid. So it works very differently. and it has a very different effect on your body, and it does not have anything to do with the HPA axis. So what I usually tell patients is that it's not something that you should be concerned about as far as CSW goes. It should not be responding in your body the way that glucocorticoids are. However, if it's really something that scares you and you have a lot of fear for, I will just eliminate it from your formula altogether. I think most Chinese herbal formulas actually include licorice in it. And the reason is because it actually is a great herb to sort of harmonize all the different herbs together and actually take the harshness out of some of the herbs that can be a little bit more strong. And I think most herbal formulas that have it in it actually meld together a lot better than those that don't use it. The other thing is we use it in such small amounts that it's really, really not enough to cause any issues at all. I think there was a study that I actually put in my research paper that talked about, what level do you have to be at for the mineral corticoid to actually become, a factor in your body. And it had to be a lot more than what we actually use in a typical formula. So, like I said, I take it out for anybody who is really concerned about it. But if it's not a concern, it actually does do a lot of good things for the formula.
Thank you for clearing that up. That is very helpful. Another thing we talked about when I last saw you in person was that I know my acupuncturist that I used to see a long time ago, she said that acupuncture alone wouldn't be able to help the skin get better, or at least my condition when it was really severe. So I know you mentioned that that's true. So I just found that really interesting that acupuncture alone won't help, but herbs will need to be supported as well to help support the process.
Yeah, I would say acupuncture is definitely helpful, but I think the problem is that most people can't do it every day, right? A little bit difficult to get to an acupuncturist every day, and it's probably very expensive. Herbal medicine is something that affects your body every day, right? And it's something that you can do on your own. You don't need somebody to actually administer the treatment to you. And I think that herbs in general are just so much better for skin conditions because they can be so specific about, the location of the lesion and dealing with the severity of a particular thing by changing the dosage of the amount of that particular ingredient. Whereas, with acupuncture, maybe there is a point that works with, the dampness in your body that's causing this oozing and weeping and stuff. But it's one point, right? Versus I can take an ingredient and go, well, Abby probably needs a little bit more than Jane for this particular ingredient, so I'll just add a little bit more. So it's a little bit easier to customize.
Got it. That's interesting. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is actually the herbs side of things. I recently read an article that said 9 out of 10 herbs that are used are contaminated. Sometimes they can contain antibiotics or even other types of medicines in it, or pesticides or heavy metals. So I read a lot about that. And also my naturopath a long time ago also told me that a lot of herbs are not regulated and a lot of them come from China. So the lead levels are also very high. So I've been actually looking into this a lot about how it's really, really important to get herbs that are third party tested, that actually get just tested even by a third party. If you can ask them for a certificate of analysis, that's really helpful too. So I love that you're using a company that actually does third party testing because I've looked them up and I think that's so important. So I'm so glad that you use them.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that was a really important thing for me. When I started practicing, I felt really strongly if I am going to be promoting natural medicine, everything has to be natural and good, right? So I spent a lot of time researching companies that could be good partners to work with. And I did find a lot of variation in what people did in terms of sourcing herbs, what they felt was adequate and satisfactory versus, higher levels of satisfaction. And it really became apparent to me that it was important to work with a company that really had high standards, that really did their homework and made sure that all the herbs are sourced from, really good farms that are not using pesticides, that are not using, all kinds of weird things, that are, making sure it's not mixed and contaminated with other things. I think Chinese medicine has gotten a bad rap from a few companies that have, adulterated some of their formulas with steroids and things like that. And it's unfortunate because it's really not the majority of people out there. It's like one or two companies that are basically ruining it for everybody else. And, I just think the best thing you can do is try your best to do the right thing. And, it's good to be aware about these things and to make sure that, the people that you're working with are not doing these kinds of things. But I would not say that the majority of people are doing things like that. I would say most people are like myself, trying really hard to do the right thing and to do the right thing for our patients. So I know there's a lot of fear out there for those particular products. Always go to somebody that is going to try a lot harder to be a lot more reputable about the herbs that they're actually administrating.
Yeah, I actually had to Google one in my area just to check for one. I think I Googled third-party testing for, herbal medicine, and I was able to find one, which is really, really interesting. But the old Chinese medicine practitioner that I used to see, she wouldn't let me go to, get herbs from another pharmacy. So I'm guessing that could be the case for some people, if they see certain Chinese medicine practitioners. Maybe it's because the Chinese medicine practitioner earns some money from if they have their own herbs. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's the case that I found.
Well, I actually, because I tried really hard to find a pharmacy that, upheld really high standards, I am very reluctant to work with other pharmacies. Like some people would come to me and say, hey, can we meet? And, they live somewhere else. And they're like, can you just put together a formula and I can bring it to my nearby pharmacy and they'll fulfill it? And I'll say, well, that's great that it's convenient for you, but I don't know anything about this pharmacy and I don't want to put my formula in with them if I don't know whether or not they're actually, sourcing their herbs from a reputable place and if they're placing all these tests in place to make sure that whatever they have is good. So I think sometimes patients are a little frustrated with me because I'm, pretty strict about that kind of stuff. I want to make sure they're getting good stuff. But, my reputation's at line too, right? So, if I were to give them the formula and they fulfilled it from this other pharmacy and something happened to them, it would come back to me at some point, right? So
that's true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I do not do that at all. They have to go through this one pharmacy and it's because I vetted them and I know that they have good stuff and it's all going to be safe.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that also, just shows what kind of standards you have for your practice, that, you have very high standards. And it's just great. I know maybe it can be frustrating for some people, but I do understand, you only want them to have the best. And so that's why you're using your pharmacy. And I've also read articles where, some people have had liver damage or kidney damage from using Chinese medicine that has not been third-party tested and that has had contaminants in them. So I think that's why it's so important to use herbal medicine. And even for myself, I'm finding it's so important to look for supplements that are really, really high quality and not contaminated at all.
Yeah, I think every single kind of medicine is really important to make sure that it's the best, right? Even vitamins, right? There's a lot of different levels of vitamins. And I think most people just go, well, the one at my Costco or whatever is good enough. But if you really do the research, there's a big difference between, very, very well-sourced good vitamins versus, not so good ones. And so I think that's true of every single thing. But, it depends on how much work people want to do to make sure that they get the right stuff. But I feel like with herbal medicine, it's my job to do that for my patients because they shouldn't have to do that homework. And, it's too much to ask for them to do it. So I think it's my responsibility to make sure they get good stuff.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. That's really important. So I think we've reached almost the last couple minutes of our show. So I just want to ask if you have any last words for people who might be listening or watching or any last words of advice that you might be able to give them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of, not sure what direction to go with their eczema sometimes, and they get contradictory information from different practitioners, and it's sort of hard to like figure out like who should I be listening to, right? Because one set of practitioners says you should be taking this, that, and the other thing. Another set of practitioners says something else. Another person says diet. Another person says allergies. Go get tested and whatnot. I think that eczema is a very interesting condition because there's so many reasons why you can have it. And the unfortunate thing for each person who has it is they kind of have to figure out what their combination of factors is. So I don't think there's any one magic bullet that's going to be good for everyone. So I think like if you've tried a lot of things, Western solutions, you've tried a lot of supplements and whatnot, and you're still not getting answers or you're not getting resolution, like herbal medicine is probably a good place to try. Like I said, I work very closely with Dr. Leo in that if I find somebody who isn't responding to herbal medicine, I'll definitely send them to him if they live in Chicago or if they're willing to go to Chicago. So I think it's really important to find, practitioners who know other practitioners in other disciplines, because they're probably the ones who are really looking out for their patients and trying to find the best solution for them. I don't think I'm the answer for everyone, but I do think I can probably help a lot of people. But for the people that really are not meant for herbal medicine, I want to have an arsenal of people that I can send people to as well. So I think it's all about getting better. And instead of like just pushing any one medicine, I think it's about doing what's best for the patient.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really great approach that you have. And it's about finding the right practitioner and just, the right medicine that works for the patient as well. So I'm wondering if people wanted to contact you or find out more about you, where can they go to find you or contact you?
Oh, sure. So the easiest way to get in touch with me is to just go to my website, which is just amethystacu.com. On the homepage, there's basically a way to contact me if you want to set up a complimentary consultation, which I'm happy to do. I think it's really important for people to sort of meet me, kind of understand like how I work, and also ask any questions they have about herbal medicine, because I'm pretty sure most people don't know a lot about it. And so, I would want to know as much as possible before signing up for something like that. And then if people feel like they feel comfortable with me and they feel like, this might be something they really want to, try, then what we would do is like set up an initial intake and then go from there. It's no obligation. I mean, it's really just an opportunity to talk and to just learn a little bit more. The complimentary consultation is about 30 minutes, so it's pretty generous. And then, you can decide whether or not it's for you.
Thank you. I think that's really great that you shared all that information. And it's true. You want to find a practitioner who's right for you as well. And thank you so much for sharing all the information. I think you mentioned, some patients want to learn more about herbal medicine and find out if it's right for them. So this podcast will hopefully also help people out there who are just wondering more about it and things that they can do to help it. So I appreciate you for being on the show today and for answering so many questions and giving lots of great tidbits. So thank you again. And if anyone wants, they can head over to your website to find out more about you. So thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Abby. It was such a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening to the Eczema Podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass it along to your friends. Visit eczemaconquerors.com for more articles and tips. Thanks for listening.